Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to begin our next session on Israel and Hamas, lessons learned from Operation Breaking Dawn, the last operation. With us is a panel of distinguished speakers, Brigadier General in Reserves Gal Hirsch, who is a speaker at Harachman University and a senior fellow at the ICT, who was the former head of the Galilee Command and is now an author and a researcher. Dr. Ronit Marzan, also a research fellow at the ICT, a researcher of the Palestinian and a professor of Middle Eastern history, served for 32 years in the intelligence and security, and she wrote a book about Arafat and also about the Arab Spring. Mr. Oz Noy, another fellow at the ICT, former head of the Israel and Abroad Division in the Israel Security Agency, or Shabak, who has vast experience intercepting terror attacks. And the final panelist, Mr. Yossi Yehoshua, military correspondent at Yediot Achronot and Ynet, who has covered various military IDF operations, including the last one, Breaking Dawn. Thank you all for coming and good afternoon. We will begin with a very short issue, a very small issue that has come up following Operation Breaking Dawn. We've heard the conclusions, the commentaries and interpretations that Hamas has now become the responsible adult in the Gaza Strip. And I would like to ask you, Brigadier General in Reserves Gal Hirsch, can it be that the use of these terms, responsible adult and an institutionalized organization, actually mean that it's not only a terror organization anymore, but a political state organization? Can we compare it to other organizations that we know? Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this very important conference. It's my home. I feel at home here. Thank you, Dana, for inviting me and for introducing us. And hello to my fellow panelists. I would like to talk about Operation Breaking Dawn and address your questions first by saying that it was a very successful, rapid, efficient and effective operation that very quickly expressed IDF at its best, the ISA at its best, and our defense establishment at its best. However, we must also remember that even though we demonstrated our abilities and the entire Middle East was watching, and even beyond the Middle East, we are being observed closely, and we can see, and everyone can see IDF's capability and skills. It is important to say, and I am saying it mostly for the public in Israel and for Israeli society, that to a certain extent this operation may be perceived as a deluxe operation, because the expectations following it will be that from now on all operations will look like that. But the campaign against organizations that are larger, that are all to some extent proxies of Iran, and are all terror armies and not terror organizations, because we have a whole belt around us of terror armies, terror military organizations as part of the Al-Quds and IRGC activities, Iranian activities, in order to deter Israel from attacking its nuclear program and in order to attack Israel not from afar but from close up. And that's why they have built terror armies around us. Hamas is an army. And as a deputy commander in the depth command, the depth corps of the IDF during Operation Protective Edge, I saw from close up what it looks like when the Nukhba forces, who are, let's say, the special forces of Hamas, and I saw, and of course it's a very, personal acquaintance, Hezbollah's forces. I saw inspiration, I saw them getting the force built up, I saw their theory, their war theory, and I saw their levels of thinking and levels of command. And without a doubt, Hamas is a terror army. It is being inspired by Iran. It is, of course, given tailwind by Iran, and unfortunately not only by Iran. And Hamas has also found itself responsible for other areas that are not just the military. Not only its forte, they also have to take care of the population, take care of employment and everything that is kind of authority, that is civilian matters. It's a sovereign, right? And when you have an authority, it means you have to be responsible. Authority means responsibility, and that's where Hamas is struggling, because being an authority is easier than being responsible. And we are experiencing the great tragedy of the Gaza Strip, where millions of people are actually taken captive by a terror army that serves fundamentalist interests and the interests of another. And this, of course, will be discussed later on, but Hamas has the role, as it views it, of fighting the state of Israel. And now we're asking ourselves whether they are also seeing their role as taking care of the population. Well, this is very interesting. Thank you very much. Who's responsible for the Gaza Strip and how that goes together with the West Bank? But I'd like to ask you, Dr. Marzan, do the Islamic Jihad also view Hamas as the responsible adult in the Gaza Strip? Hello, everyone. There is a big difference between the Islamic Jihad and between Hamas. We tend to mix them up and to put them in the same basket, but there is a very big difference between them for one simple reason. Because in 1995, Hamas began, following the Oslo Accords, to understand that if they want to be part of the political arena and not only to leave it up to the Palestinian Authority, they must become a political party, a political entity in one way or another, or at least to participate in politics. And so they set up the Al-Khalas party, and later on in 2006 we saw that it really matures this process and they become a political actor. However, from the moment that Hamas decides to become a political actor, those who are escalating and who's leading it and dragging it to military escalation time and time again, and wants to leave it in a very clear terror organization box and not to allow it to break out and become a political actor, because then they'll be left alone. Because you have to understand, Islamic Jihad is not a political actor. It is a military organization per se. It waves the banner of destroying Israel and jihad until the end of time. It is not a political actor. It is a military organization. That is its raison d'etre. And that's why it has no reason or desire to go into any kind of arrangement with Israel. It is making every effort to make Hamas fail in its desires, in its preparedness, in its willingness to be flexible with Israel. And this story is very interesting because Hamas, when I look at it, is doing many important things, and especially Yahya Sinwar. And Yahya Sinwar is a partner of ours. He's a partner of ours for several reasons, which I will elaborate on shortly. But first of all, he does ta'diyah with Israel. Second of all, he is an ally of Egypt. He has security coordination with Egypt. Third, and it's very important, Yahya Sinwar wants to be placed, to be positioned in a good place in the hierarchy of men. And it's very important. Masculinity within a society that is a conservative, traditional religious society is very important for us to understand. And he finds himself fighting for, first of all, the hegemonic masculinity of Israel, and also the very violent masculinity of the Islamic Jihad, which keeps dragging it down. With the return protests, Hamas was being dragged in by the Islamic Jihad to take a civilian initiative that was supposed to even not be violent and to deteriorate it into a violent place. And the third thing, the third masculinity, is this limp masculinity of the Palestinian Authority. And Yahya Sinwar doesn't want to be coupled with them, doesn't want to be associated with them, to be seen as someone who is defeated and someone who is groveling in front of Israel. And the fourth masculinity is a civilian masculinity. All the social, civil society organizations that are challenging Hamas in the Gaza Strip no longer want to take upon themselves and to accept the armed conflict. They are looking at the Palestinians' armed conflict as a failed attempt, and as a result of all of that, because of this constant competition with all of these challenges that these various masculinities are posed with, is not simple. And that is why Israel must embrace Yahya Sinwar. And I'm saying something that perhaps sounds crazy, insane, but it is certainly sane. And we will understand that as time goes by. He is our partner. The Egyptians have already understood that, and we should understand that too.
So if I summarize everything, we have a terrorist military group. I think it has implications on us, and we saw it in Breaking Dawn, so I'll be happy to hear you. First of all, good afternoon to everybody, and thank you. Hamas is, first of all, a terror organization, exclamation mark. But with the years, there's a certain body which is a little bit more complex, and it's made up of the conventional bodies that we've known throughout our existence. And the Hamas is an organization which we call it hybrid. Definitely it's political. It's also it's got political systems, governance, conventional. In the Gaza Strip, it has political values in its conduct abroad. It's not just vis-à-vis Iran and Lebanon, but in general, in international. Definitely financial steps. It's an organization that on the one hand it has conventional terrorist systems in Judea and Samaria. It's an organization that has a state with all its implications, sovereignty and all systems of a state in the Gaza Strip. It has a system, as I said, political as well, abroad. And this is a terror organization that has an army today. The armed forces of the Hamas in the Gaza Strip is more similar to an army than a terror organization as we identify. The Palestinian Authority does not have it, if we understand correctly. Right. It's got all sorts of structure with divisions and departments, a definite hierarchy with ranks, weapons. Also, you cannot compare the weapons of Hamas to the IDF, but still, it is a military, political system which is improving daily. And therefore, the Hamas is an organization which is complex. We have to cope with all its layers, with different tools, and to understand this complexity. Within that, we also have the Islamic Jihad, which is under the auspices of Hamas, full stop. More obedient, less obedient, but the Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip accepts the governance of Hamas, and at least at the moment, I don't remember actually that there were any aspirations of controlling the Gaza Strip or to controlling the governance. And the gap, after all, it's we're talking about here about military organizations, and the goals of the Hamas and the Jihad are similar, and that is to do away with the State of Israel. They see in the entire area of the State of Israel as a Waqf land which belongs to them. And the only difference is the way they do it, how the Hamas represent it and how the Islamic Jihad shows this. I don't think Hamas is going to be the responsible adult. First of all, Hamas does whatever is good for it. It's an organized organization. It's complex with the management processes that are very sophisticated, a very developed strategic view. And at the end of the day, Hamas does what is good for it. Because if Hamas was what I think we should have seen, had it really been the responsible adult, it should have prevented the jihad than going to war. But they didn't do it. It allowed the jihad to complicate us and to make us go into this round. But on the other hand, it left it alone as well. It didn't intervene. And Hamas does exactly what Hamas wants to do. Not the Israel's interest, maybe a little bit of the jihad, but we saw it also in the Guardian of the Walls, but we also saw it in the Black Belt. There were identical interests. Okay. The commentator from the Yediot Achronot newspaper, thank you for being with us. Just two comments, if I may, regarding the words of Gal and Shuki. regarding what Gal said, this is the way you do in the army. It's a deluxe operation, and if something bothers the northern commander, is the issue of expectations, because in this operation, it increased the gap in that area of expectations vis-à-vis the citizens. This operation, which was short and accurate, to the point, and got all the superlatives, is not similar, not even to a short round, if I had now, around the grid, and but especially around the grid, because you know, the estimates in the army are different. We saw it in other operations, and we have to deduce from an operation in Gaza with the Islamic Jihad as opposed to things in the north. That creates a gap. And all in all, if we think about the media, how it reviews such events and what the public thinks. Regarding the perception of the IDF regarding Hamas, they see it maybe a partner. Tomorrow, the General Aaron Khalifa is going to be here, and I guess you're going to hear from him if he's really open. You will hear very interesting statements regarding Hamas. He's the one who actually spoke about a year ago after the Guardian of the World, about 5 years of quiet, and he still believes it. Yeah, ask him if you can. He believes that we can obtain a long period of quiet. He feels that the streams in Gaza, many people who pressure the Hamas, it's not in vain that the Hamas did not intervene in this round. And as for what my predecessor just said, Hamas has not really, it tried to stop the groups of the Islamic Jihad, because it started with a few groups of the Islamic Jihad who were deployed in Gaza, and they decided to attack a bus or a car or whatever, Israeli. And the commander here made the decision to retreat the forces a little bit with it, and they were criticized and I thought they were justly criticized. And the commander of the Islamic Jihad, had he moved, had he regressed, even on Friday morning, how would the Israeli deterrence look, especially if you talk about Hezbollah in the north? So we had some luck, and we were the first. Hamas had nothing to do with it. So here you have to put everything into the context and tell the story as it was. Regarding the West Bank, at the moment, the army doesn't see any intervention of Hamas. Even the Jihad, you know that in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, we have to put it where it's should. It's much smaller. This is a different kind of terror. It's a red terror of networks, of TikTok stars. A month ago, I interviewed the commander of the Duvdevan unit. He defined the guy who was killed in Nablus as a pimp with a weapon in his hand. Something we cannot cope or grapple with those social media, not just in Gaza. But yes, we hear from the head of the Shabak, and we heard, and we also see it, an escalation. The number of target killings. No, but this wave started in March, April. And it's interesting. It was open in our territory, in Beersheba and in Hadera, Israeli cities, with terrorists with Israeli identity cards. That's how it started. Later on, it moved to the north Samaria. That's where the terrorists came from. And the IDF, what did it do? It closed the separation line. 26 battalions, which is a very... never before was such a number that went into the Judea and Samaria. And after we closed this border, IDF goes every single night to activities in Jenin, and they're much more violent than they were in the past. At the time, I'm talking about a year ago, in order to go into the Joseph tomb, the IDF went with 1 battalion. Today, we're talking about 4 battalions that go in order to safeguard the worshippers. I'm talking about proportions. In the last wave, 19 citizens and soldiers in Israel were killed. Since May, thank God, not a soldier, not a citizen was killed. Because sometimes we're criticized how we review the events. And if we go back to the decade before, there were scores, many years, there was more than 100 people killed a year. So this year, if you take the proportion, we have to put everything into the right proportion. And the main threat is, first of all, Hezbollah, and the others go after that. I just want to talk about what you said about General Khalifa, if he talks tomorrow about it. Hamas, as far as we're concerned, and the international law, when we talk about responsibility or governance and the sovereignty of an organization, then Hamas is like a state for all intents and purposes. But the responsibility that the IDF sees that Hamas can take upon itself, do you think that if now are we tending to see Hamas as a political organization and not only a terror organization, maybe it's legitimate to start talking to them, to negotiate not through the Egyptians in order to gain this quiet and make Gaza a place you can live in? Well, with your permission, I'd like to start my answer relating to Dr. Roni, what she said. She said Sinwar is a partner, and we should start thinking about it. I think that if we look back to 3 test cases, let's look at the Fatah, PLO, which became eventually from a bitter enemy to somebody we shake hands with on the lawns of the White House, and we sign agreements of peace, which were disappointing, but the public in Israel will not forgive and not forget the Palestinian treason and then the bloodshed we had to live in after that, up to the various operations. But that same organization that I, at the age of 3, as a boy in the city of Arad, I remember that they were exploding the water tanks of Arad. And at the age of 7, in another city close to Tel Aviv, there was a Katyusha attack on a neighborhood, and we, the kids in the neighborhood, one woman was killed and another 3 kids were hurt from Katyusha attack from an Arab nearby village. And the place also I live today, and throughout the years we saw and had terrible experiences, and then it came to a political process, and then it came to a realization of a certain version of that autonomy that we took. But let's take another test case. When I commanded the Galilee Command before the war, what was the discussion in the north? A strategic division said that Hezbollah is becoming a political organization. That's what they want. They are more in the Lebanese parliament, and we don't see a war. I thought otherwise. I fought it nails and tooth and nail, but Olmert, who was then PM, and all the others thought, and we really prepared ourselves to war. And there was a war. It broke out. But the Hezbollah also developed this approach of the 2 hats. There's a political hat, and I also have a military hat. You know what the difference is? Because it depends. At the moment, it's not a sovereign. That's if you look at it legally, but I'm thinking as somebody who looks at Lebanon, who lived in Lebanon and fought in Lebanon for many years, that in practice, Iran with Hezbollah have full control and sovereignty in Lebanon in practice. But Hezbollah, politically, militarily, what is this thing? What is this body? And now we come to the Hamas. And is there a partner? And the question is not a partner that's legitimate to talk to, but the question is not when we want to do it, but when does the other side going to understand it? I think that Israel, whenever it looked for an address, it started corresponding with this address. It was after the first Intifada, leading to the Oslo Accords. If there was an address in Lebanon, we would have corresponded with that as well. But unfortunately, our correspondence now is through blows. And what organizes things in the Middle East is blows, not a war, not an operation, a blow. Okay, things get organized, and again, another blow. That's what happened in Defensive Shield. And it goes with the various operations, and eventually all of them are going to be blows. All the various operations, it's a whole chain of just to buy time. It doesn't really change reality. What changes reality is like Defensive Shield, March 2002, after 131 people murdered in Israel, 1,400 injured, and the last thing, it reminds me what happens now, those operations recurring into northern Samaria, from Nablus to Jenin, this hot spot these days. It reminds me the period when I moved from the Binyamin division to the center, the strategic order that I got at the time from the chief of staff. He said to me, Tal, you have to transfer us from defense to offense. And then for a year, we had a series of operations with the goal to prepare the IDF to the big blow, which came in Defensive Shield. Every single night, we started with just some reconnaissance groups, and then we are now close to a blow in northern Samaria, and at the moment we'll have no other choice, and we will have to do something methodical against terror.
I'd like to ask you, Dr. Marzan, what is Hamas aspiring to do? Does it want to take ownership, to own the Palestinian problem vis-à-vis Israel? And are the two leaderships, internal and external, here and abroad, see things the same way? Before I talk about Hamas here and Hamas overseas, just one remark. We were not smart enough to take the Oslo Accords and to apply them and to fill them out to the end. We did not do that, nor did the Palestinians. And it's important that we remember one very important thing. The Oslo Accords allowed the state of Israel a lot of time not to be liable for the economic and security duties. For many years, the Palestinian Authority did the work for us. They worked hard for us. So we shouldn't forget that. What we did to Abu Mazen is a completely different issue that I don't want to go into because it's not the subject at hand. But we tend to always show how they always did that, one thing or the other, this, that, and the other. But we always put aside what we did and what our contribution to it was, to the Oslo Accords and to the progress toward a peace process. And we see where we are today. So another blow and another blow. I guess, Gal, that these blows cannot deliver. And what will ultimately bring about real quiet, I'm not saying recognition in the state of Israel, I'm not saying peace for the state of Israel, but certainly long-term quiet, or some sort of political arrangement that will allow quiet, that will allow us and also the people there to live respectfully, with dignity, with some national spirit. I guess only a peace process or a political arrangement will bring about. Now, as for Hamas in Gaza and Hamas overseas, what are the differences between them and what their aspirations and goals are? Look, the state of Israel is making a mistake, one huge strategic error. It is working with Qatar and with the external leadership of Hamas. Qatar is a subversive, dangerous country. It is the country that has set ablaze the Arab Spring and has brought to the collapse of Arab regimes through long-term training of activists. They tapped into the real distress of young Arabs. I wrote a whole book about that. and led to their regime's collapse. It undermined them. It kind of sedated them. It gave them money on the one hand, but on the other hand, it trained these activists, gave them the cameras and microphones and media attention, and allowed them ultimately to lead to the ousting of their leaders in order to establish oppressive Islamic regimes instead of them. And they're doing the same with Hamas and Khaled Mash'al and Hamas leadership. And we should not be talking to them. Khaled Mash'al is talking about the 1948 Arabs, the Israeli Arabs, as those who will take apart Israel from inside. He's talking about the leadership in Gaza and Ramallah of Sinwar, who is considered his adversary, and municipal authorities, so that he will be the head of the PLO and take over the entire Palestinian arena. And moreover, another thing that Khaled Mash'al is talking about is Hamas doesn't want a small government. He wants everything. We, the Israelis, must not, under any circumstances, allow this man to come to Jordan, which is where he's headed, because the Jordanian king is already about to be taken captive by Qatar. They are intimidating him and telling him, if you don't allow Khaled Mash'al to return to Jordan and from there to Palestine, the Israelis will turn Jordan into the Palestinians' alternative homeland. And therefore he will let him come back. And when he lets him come back, he will take over the entire arena. Hamas will rule the West Bank as well, and that is not Israel's interest. Therefore, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, led by Yahya Sinwar, who is security coordinating with Egypt, who wants to make peace with Muhammad Dakhlan, who wants to have Gaza quiet and not the kind of quiet you get from cemeteries, and that's a quote from him. Why should we believe him? Why shouldn't we believe him? Why shouldn't we try him out? Instead, we are giving him blows. We are turning him into the villain, to the neighborhood bully, and he seems as the one who is selling the Palestinian homeland for fuel and for dollars, because he gets Qatari money. So we should empower him. He is our partner, not Khaled Mash'al, not the outside leadership that is a dangerous leadership that wants to go for everything, all in. That's not Yahya Sinwar. Do you agree with her, Oz? How will Hamas tap into this and utilize the lack of governance in the West Bank and the PA's weakness? Do you think he will only stay in Gaza? What do you think will happen? I will elaborate, but I want to answer your previous question, whether we should talk to them or not. I think that this question has three main aspects when we want to examine whether it's the right thing to do or not. And it's an examination that's been carried out for many years, and it's a very complicated dilemma with opinions going either way. The first aspect is, let's say, the value-based moral aspect. Is it right to be talking to an organization that is a terror organization and is killing us? And that is a question that is relatively easy to answer, because if I can prove that through our dialogue with them I will prevent them and stop them from killing other Israelis, then perhaps I can maybe balance this equation. And maybe some will disagree, but we can put that aside. But if it's a terror organization that's responsible for the civilian population, we're talking about 2.5 million people. Well, some will say that morally you cannot talk to this organization because all this organization wants to do is kill Israelis, and that is a moral, value-based approach that is certainly legitimate. But again, I believe that if we will be able to prove that through this dialogue we will be able to reduce or stop other Israelis from being killed, then perhaps this equation or this moral approach can be evened out or balanced out, even though it's a legitimate approach. The other aspect is a political aspect. On the political Israeli level, will Israeli politicians allow themselves to speak to Hamas and to be branded as one who is in conversation with them? I don't want to go into that. Well, thankfully we don't have to go into that. And the third is the practical aspect. Are we in dialogue with Hamas? Can we, by having a dialogue with Hamas, make steps happen that will help us on the practical, tactical, operational level. I personally believe that in some places the answer is yes. I don't think that it's right to be speaking with Yahya Sinwar. I think that if and when this step will be taken, it should be in interim levels, lower levels. There are many aspects to this, but I don't want to go into too much detail. Not to rely only on dialogue through the Egyptians. It is complex in many ways. I don't want to go into that either right now. And certainly there is reason to create a tactical dialogue, perhaps even micro-tactical, with certain echelons, with certain levels that are proxy Hamas. All sorts of models can be created that are not the Israeli Prime Minister speaking to Yahya Sinwar. Between that and the other option, there is great distance, and we can create a model that serves that purpose. And as for your question, look, first of all, Hamas leader outside, and has been outside for too many years. We tried to prevent it. It's not Khaled Mash'al, but Ismail Haniyeh in his second term in office. He was recently elected maybe a year or so ago. And we can say that since his first term in office, and since Ismail Haniyeh has taken the reins and is now steering and navigating Hamas, and alongside other processes that have taken place in the last 8 years or so, Hamas's weight in the Gaza Strip, the activists in the Gaza Strip, is only going up. And one might say that a large part, even most of the decisions, including the strategic decisions made by Hamas, have been made and impacted quite clearly, at least from what I see, by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And certain issues, like the military issues, for instance, or even the MIAs and POWs, it's the Gaza Strip. They update them, they tell them what they're going to do, they are making the decisions, and therefore we need to understand that the Gaza Strip state is the main area where most of the impact on Israel happens there. And therefore, most of the attention should be diverted there without taking away from all that needs to happen and to be done, and preventing Hamas in the international arena, whether it's in Qatar, not only in Qatar, whether it's in Turkey, in Lebanon, and elsewhere. And we need to do that, and we need to do it all the time, wherever we can kind of stop them, and disrupt their financing, and with political steps that Hamas is doing not only with Arab countries but also with other countries. We just saw a visit in Russia. There have been several such visits, including in Western countries, and certainly we need to concentrate our efforts there and to do everything in our power in order to uproot this kind of activity. But ultimately, the key and main and imminent threat to Israel from Hamas is from the Gaza Strip. That is impacting the West Bank as well. And of course, to your question, we can take Yahya Sinwar's last speech, and to analyze just some of the narratives, some of the key themes, in order to understand his way of thinking. Yahya Sinwar views Hamas as the protector of Jerusalem, the defender of Jerusalem, not for the Palestinians, but for the entire Muslim world. Yahya Sinwar views Hamas as the protector of the Palestinians. Yahya Sinwar even contacted the Israeli Arab members of Knesset. He is also, he's got his auspices over those Arab Israeli members of Knesset are supposed to conduct themselves within this political Arab-Israeli kind of system. And the answer to your question is yes, of course, Hamas views itself as the leader of the Palestinian people. They intended in the last elections that were cancelled just before Operation Guardian of the Walls, they were sure that if these elections will take place, they will win. They will take the elections just like it did in 2006. And it's not wrong in broad strokes. Abu Mazen cancelled these elections for a reason, because Hamas views itself as the organization that is destined to rule and to lead the Palestinian people. Okay, how about the media and cognition? I have a few comments about the IDF. Let's put things in order. IDF decided, Yahya Sinwar, we are way past this conversation. The IDF is talking to it. According to reports, it made coordinations with him before Operation Breaking Dawn. So in terms of the IDF, there's no question. Who is behind? The ISA, Shabak. They are dragging their heels. Why? Because it was a mistake. They should have accepted the IDF's position long ago. They should have had many more Palestinian workers. We saw that it exerts pressure on Hamas. It is working very well. So in terms of that question, as for the IDF, we are somewhere else entirely already. And also, Hamas, as I've said, is not now in the West Bank. If Hamas were, God forbid, go into the West Bank, we will go back to very bad days. And that's why I wanted to put things into perspective, because if Hamas were to go back into the West Bank, then we will certainly be very worried. But still, overhead, if we look at some documents, what does the IDF want? What does Israel want? We want Hamas deterred, weakened, and sovereign. So sovereign has remained, weakened. It's a bit of a challenge. How can we, together with the Egyptians, close Rafah and the sea? And in terms of the blows need to take away. And that's what happened in the last 12 months. Every blow was not just one certain site, one construction, one building. We took away assets, mostly so that they will not be able to export rockets or manufacture rockets in the future. And what does it look like in the media? There was one very interesting strike when the IDF, in a certain weekend after Ashkelon was being targeted with rockets, they didn't just they had an outpost right by Nativ HaSara, and the IDF decided to take it down. But instead of taking it down, the IDF decided to target a rocket manufacturing factory in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. And we saw how the media and how the inhabitants of Gaza and Nativ HaSara are saying, why didn't you take down that outpost? And that's why we have a long way to go still in this whole area of public diplomacy and the war over hearts and minds. Because I always take this point of departure. Was there a change in Operation Breaking Dawn? Yes, I just want to ask the question in a way that we understand, that people understand where we're headed. The media is a battlefield for all intents and purposes. Just like we address the military and security aspects, we address the war over hearts and minds. I wanted to ask Yossi or Yehoshua, has there been any change in the way that both Israel and Hamas are using the media in order to create an advantage?
And I talk about a cast-led operation. The professionals always talk about 4 legs: the battle, the military itself, the political branch, whether you negotiate with the Egyptians or the Americans, in Lebanon, how we close the legal arm there too in Castlet. Following that, we had the Goldstone report, and we learned the lessons, and we introduced legal advisors to every division, and now we advanced since then. However, regarding information and recognition and awareness, this is still a crippled leg up to the last operation, because in the former one, in Guardian of the World, how Hamas with a WhatsApp issued a message that they're going to shoot Tel Aviv, and at 9 o'clock Tel Aviv became paralyzed because of the WhatsApp. That media strategy was amazing. There's no outside, he spoke about nothing happened, there's no attack. He was talking about metro only at the end of the operation. But here in Israel, every strike, every one rocket, just recently we had a symposium about it, and they also criticized us, the journalists. How do you review? There's one rocket on one house. Okay, nobody was hurt. But from morning to night on television, in the media, as if, God forbid, destruction of the country. On the other hand, we throw tons of bombs on them, and now we have advanced. We saw it when the Islamic Jihad tried to create a narrative where they hit civilians with a rocket. We saw in a very short time the IDF reacting within minutes and shows the video and changes the narrative. We still have to improve in this area. We are a superpower, maybe technological. We do everything quick, but still, In the non-symmetrical conflict, the media has advantages, and this leg has to be strengthened here in Israel. Okay, last round, just one sentence. Where are we heading to? We are now preparing for the next round. What's going on? Of course, we have to hope for the development of relations between the states, all the neighbors around us, and that includes those who control Gaza. But parallel to that, we have to prepare to what we call a similar guardian of the walls, because we might not have another choice, and we are, of course, preparing for that. We do want political relations, but we also have to prepare ourselves to a situation whereby we'll have no choice but to act there. And there's some sort of a cognition that this whole warfare is basically on awareness, on cognition. You have to influence the cognition, the awareness of people. And the Gaza Strip, doesn't have to be the issue only of the state of Israel. Just how we relate to the Iranian nuclear, it's not just our problem. It's a regional, global problem. The Gaza Strip as well. It should be an international project, and we can turn it into a better place. At the time when President Clinton landed in Dahania in the Gaza Strip, it seemed like the end of days. And maybe one day it's going to come back. You can take the Gaza Strip as an international project, not by the UN, by the World Bank, and with an international effort to make it a blossoming place. Why not? One word about awareness. We spoke about the Islamic Jihad and Hamas, but we didn't speak about the Palestinian youngsters, the youth, so that they will not think only about blood. We have to think on one word: shame. Shame was defined by a Palestinian psychiatrist. This is the nuclear bomb of emotions. And unless we understand that the young Palestinians find themselves today grappling with three master images: the biological father they're ashamed of because they are submissive and ready to get the crumbs that the entities in Ramallah and Gaza give them. It's very angry about their political father, the one in Gaza and in Ramallah, that both are corrupt. And the third thing, it also upset with the stepfather, the Israel, that relates to it as an elephant in the room. They're no longer an elephant. They call themselves today actually the lions. We are in the lion's den. They're no longer passive elephants. Today they are lions. And when they leave that den in which they exist, they are going to devour anything that comes their way. These are the ones we have to look at, these young people. And when they will live with national dignity and hold their heads erect, then they'll be quiet, both in Israel and in Gaza. And when there'll be noise, if anybody makes a noise, then we can deal with them. We know how to do it very well. We have 1 minute left. In the political strategy, we say that if the debt deterrence doesn't change, you can't expect anything else to happen. If we'll be very good and we'll maintain the deterrence that we created, then we'll have a lot of sand in the hourglass. Yeah. But the question is, what will be the trigger when it's going to happen? That's the only question. I don't think that we are before a next round in Gaza. Just one caveat that I want to talk about Sinwar. If you want to talk to him, it's fine, but not to forget that there's another guy over there called Muhammad Def. Muhammad Def is the one who surprised us in Guardian of the Walls. When we were briefed before the operation and we were told that Hamas doesn't want a conflict, then they based themselves on Yahya Sinwar. And apparently they forgot, or they didn't listen well enough didn't have enough intelligence in our army about Mohammadef. And maybe we're describing some sort of description that the army and me and other people, we are basing ourselves on Sinwar, but at the end of the day, maybe Def will wake up, and you have to prepare yourself for that too. Last question. Are you in the Likud, Gal Hirsch? This is it? Why, something happened during the panel that I don't know of? As somebody said before me, I read about it in the papers. I must tell you, I have no idea what you're talking about, me joining the Likud. Okay, thank you very much. All the panelists, thank you very much.